Our first speaker this afternoon is D.V. Sridharan, trained as a seagoing engineer in the 1960s. His writings introduce a pioneering genre of reporting only good news about India and have been published under the title Good News India. For the last 40 years, he has been passionate about the environment, especially water conservation and ecodiversity. Now in his 80s, he is currently in the second decade of his multi-acre land regeneration work in what he hopes will become a sacred grove. D.V. Sridharan will now speak on India at 75, the necessity and the limits of good news. This session is brought to you by Indic Academy.
Good afternoon. I know how hard it must be for you to show up after a heavy lunch. Thank you for showing up. I'm looking forward to talk to you. And before I begin, I thank Pondilit Fest and the Indic Academy to have given me this opportunity to speak to you. And I bow to Sri Aurobindo, under whose gaze I now talk to you. Thanks again for showing up. I don't see many people who are too old. If you are 30 or 40, you might have heard of a site called goodnewsindia.com. That was run by me for about 6 to 8 years. I wanted to focus on what was good in India because I thought the press of that time, 22 years ago, it was not as evil as the press can be. But it's still, I think it was lazy. It highlighted the nasty, bad things that was happening in India, the front page. And it neglected the what good there might have been in the country. And I was fairly certain, it was my hunch, everything was not as uniformly bad as the front pages of the newspapers and the weekly magazines. Thank God we didn't have the social media at that time and the online crop of fungus-like online portals now that make it a business to damn India all the time. They didn't exist. So I wouldn't damn the print media of my time. It's not as evil as it is today. So they just neglected the good news. And I was at that juncture, was a fairly alienated Indian. I left home in my teens to train for the Merchant Navy, and I became a seagoing engineer. In those days, the Merchant Navy training was part of the process to make us into brown Englishmen. I rather liked it, I must say. I don't say it with any sarcasm at the time. I rather enjoyed it. I was a young boy, 17, and we were taught how to eat with knives and forks, and we had to speak only in English in the corridors. Your mother tongue can be spoken in the rooms, and we wore crisp white shorts, and stockings, and cap, and life felt good. And slowly, my alienation began at that time. I was quite unaware. But there was no sense of loss about it. I was actually looking forward. Prime Minister was Jawaharlal Nehru, and he was definitely a very adored person. Whatever the revised history of him may say, and justly so, we talk about his follies now. But at that time, he was a widely adored darling. His awakening was ahead of him. 1962 had not quite happened. And we loved him. And when I'm elder to India 47, I was born 5 years before India 47. So I stand before you as an elder felicitating the younger. So things were good. Life was good. Everything seemed positive. And Nehruji had whispered to India in the Aberdeen Congress in 1955 that India shall grow up as a socialist industrialized nation. And we vowed it. I loved it. We were going to be a replica of Russia, or possibly, if possible, like the West. And we would have industries, we'll have big smart people, and we'll forget the old India, and then we'll be a new India. And in those days, we thought of Russia first. We were extremely good friends with Russia. We were friends with China too, in case we forget. So I was an aspirational brown Englishman, and when I went to the Merchant Navy College, they groomed me further, and we had to travel only first class because we had to develop the officer-like qualities of what they thought the British of the Raj, the way they behaved. At least that's what we imagined. I started sailing the seas at quite a young age. And by the time I was in my 40s, I had seen more of the world than of India at all. And that's when I thought I was on the way to becoming a good replica of an Englishman. I was surprised to find a reaction in me. I found myself being quite annoyed whenever India was being criticized. I wondered why so. I'm going to be an Englishman. Why does this bother me? But it bothered me nevertheless. And my Nehruji's awakening came in 1962. His good friend, China, gave India a bloody nose. And he never quite recovered from it, the poor man. My own awakening was to be a little later. So when Nehru died, my ship was in London. We had gathered on the deck to mourn his passing. I remember the scenes. Many were teary-eyed. I was teary-eyed too. I thought he was a good man. And then a couple of crew broke down and rolled on the deck and wept loudly, beating their chest and all that. That was fairly the similar mood that was prevailed all over India at that time. His revising Modi, Nehru's record as a prime minister was yet ahead. So at that time, in 1965, when I was sailing, a book appeared, and it said Famine 1975. It was written by two brothers, Paddock, and that became quite a popular book. It was reviewed. I was at sea, so I couldn't get a copy. Not that I had too much money to buy one if I could get a copy. But it was extensively reviewed, and reviews in those days used to be good. It's nearly as good as reading the book through a critical eye. I read that book, and the two brothers Paddock had declared that half the world was going to die in 1975 due to starvation and food shortages. And then they said the white countries, the four countries, Australia, America, Canada, and Argentina, would have some food surpluses, so they would have the decision to make. White man's burden again. So his burden was what to do with the limited food surplus he would have and how to deploy it. So the book recommended that they categorize the world into three types of people. One, without much help, will come through the famine. Two, with a little bit of help, will still come through. They should be served with the surplus grains that the white man would have. And the third lot had no hope at all. You can't give enough food for them. You can't save them. They must be so slowly allowed to die and perish. And India was categorized in class 3. India had no hope. India must be allowed to die. And the demise was predicted for 1975. I lived through 1975, and we are all here because we didn't die. So that annoyed me. My reverie of becoming an Englishman was halted briefly, and I was on the way back. And in the meantime, India, Lal Bahadur Shastri had come, and the reality hit us. Things were bad, food shortages. Many of you won't know at all. On Thursdays, rice was not served in restaurants. And Pakistanis thought that they had an opportunity with a diminutive prime minister, that they would take a chance, but we gave a bloody nose there, but we came out of that. But then it was a hard time. And politics was terrible. Elections were won by votes being stuffed in the ballot boxes, and there was no anti-defection law. Governments was changing, altogether bad. But then I told myself, although my alienation, I had Tamil is the only my mother tongue. I can't read Devanagari, so I left with one language, English. I was totally unarmed to explore the richness of my own inheritance. So I was lost, but then I was definitely certain that there were a lot of people in India doing the good work. Otherwise, we could not have survived the 5,000 years that we are supposed to live, probably more than that. So the media, like I said, was annoyed. I said, I will start a new kind of journalism where I will publish only positive stories, good stories, authentic stories. I'll go and discover them. So I got in the car and drove around. I drove about 50 to 60,000 kilometers, not in one go, over a period of 6 years. I started publishing stories of genuine positive work being done by people. And I would publish about 1 or 2 per month. And I must say, if I may say so myself, it met with instant acclaim. And there was a lot of reception, positive feedback, and I got a lot of fan mail. I was a one-man show. I would go and meet the people. I'd never publish an article or a story which I did not case myself. Most of the time, I visited the spot. I would satisfy myself that I was putting out only good stories. See, if you wanted to write true story, the onus on you is greater than if you wanted to publish a fake story. You don't have any responsibility if you wanted to publish a fake story. Like the big industry survives today on fake stories, it has no responsibility. If you wanted to publish stories that are authentic, you've got to do the work. I'm not a trained journalist. I'm a marine engineer, used to working with my hands. I was fond of books and reading. I had never written to be published before. So my stories became quite popular. And in those days, by word of mouth and by correspondence, my audience grew to 6,000 people in those days, which is a big number. So I was a moderately famous man. Media interviewed me, and then I became popular. And the BBC, believe it or not, you know the BBC today, BBC had 3 seconds of time for me, and it said, Good News India appears to have pioneered a genre of reporting only good news. It's a novel experiment. Although it's not great journalism, it's a novel experiment. But halfway through publishing Good News India, driving around, I began to have some doubts about my work. Now, what was the purpose of this Good News India, Good News Stories, and what was its effect? What was the effect there? I was hoping that my stories would be inspiring people to do some good work themselves. And there was some evidence that was happening. And on the other hand, I found more and more people were being lulled into thinking that everything is all right in India because Good News India stories have no bad news at all. Everything is good, although authentic. So I could sense that from the fan mail. So I began to doubt my work. And then second thing was, it occurred to me, behind every good news, there was a bad situation, which this good news, good act was actually solving. So if you really apply your mind, I'll give you a small example. If you drove into a town, and if you saw an orphanage and an old age home being run very well, that's good news. But if you drove a little bit further, and you found there were 5 more orphanages and 10 more old age homes, it's a bad scene. Something is wrong with that society that has produced so many old men that could not be taken care of. There are so many orphanages that nobody wanted. So it's a fine line. One can't do good news all the time without evaluating what effect it has. And then I asked myself, what was the good news I was doing? I was putting out good, authentic stories, but what was the good that I was doing by the civilization, by this land of mine, by when I was head over heels back in love with India? What was I doing to it? I had nothing to show. So my search for the good work, what might be a good work that would amount to my contribution to this country, this civilization, that began. That was not easy to find. I couldn't run an orphanage or an old age home. No, that didn't seem so. But there was an inkling about it, but I will come to it. And before that, I want to take a small digression, and I'll come back. Don't think that I missed the thread. I want to pose a question to you. And how many of you remember the device called a flywheel in our colleges and science, physics classes? Just to refresh your memory, a flywheel is a disc with a hole in the center with a heavy rim all around it. If you put a shaft through the hole, or if you give it a flip, it begins to spin. And if you give more and more flips, it will keep spinning. So, flywheel is in effect an energy storage device. It is such a successful energy storage device, an efficient one, that today they are working on bigger and bigger flywheels to act as a storage devices to replace batteries, which are chemically harmful to the environment. So I'm not rambling on, I'll come back to my story. Then a good energy device is the way I can imagine civilization India. I imagined India as a giant flywheel, a mile high, with a big hub that we can't quite see, but is hidden in the clouds, and is gently spinning. And it is ever spinning, never began, never will end. It is always spinning. And that's how I imagine India. I'm not read in Sanskrit, or I don't even know Devanagari. This is my own metaphor for how I think India is. It's not the Kala Chakra. Kala Chakra is a timekeeper. I'm talking about a civilizational movement without an end, but it is not self-sustaining. That is the difference. The rim, the heavy rim of this flywheel that is spinning unseen has been invested in by our ancestors. And the investment was in terms of the knowledge that they developed, the truth they sought, the poems they wrote, the hymns they gave it to us. This is what is invested and is gathered in the continuing flywheel that never began because it always spun and it will never end. And that confidence I have about this country. If we imagine it as an unstoppable flywheel, India will never end. But it can slow down. It can cause us alarm. It can give us concern that it might stop or slow down. Indeed, it might slow down. If it slowed down, we would have adverse effects. If it spun faster, we will have more and more prosperity. So what does all that got to do? If you agree with me, and if you'd like to imagine India as an unstoppable, big, giant flywheel, then I can come to what I think is good work. Like I said, I have not read into our Puranas, the Itihasas, our Upanishads, or Vedanta. If I know anything at all, it's the second remove or the third remove. But I come to base my life on the basis of two concepts that I have received on YouTube and other popular media. One is the Panchamahayajna, that every Indian, when it was conceived, almost every Indian was a Hindu, it was mandated upon to worship and celebrate the Panchamahayajna as a particular order of offering gratitude every day. And this is a very interesting order that we have. On the top of it is the Pitru. Pitru are our ancestors, not necessarily a biological ancestor, the ancestors of this land. There is the Vedavyasa and Valmiki and also Shankaracharya, the more recent one. But since the time began, the people who thought of the hymns and put it all, they are the Pitrus. We are supposed to offer our thanks first to them. And then we are supposed to offer the thing to the Manushya. Manushya, the person, is not person, it's the communities and the groups in which we lived. And the Manushya is the one that we offer the thanks next. The Bhuta is a very interesting concept. That's the one that's closest to my heart. Bhuta is about the manifest nature, the integrated nature. I call it the thermostat that keeps us all safe. It controls the weather, it controls the temperature. It is the integrated forest, the mountains, the seas, the waters, the birds, the animals, everything put together, and including man, incidentally. Even without man, that will exist. This is the Bhuta. And then come the gurus and the rishis, the people who explain and transfer the information of our knowledge system to us today. And finally, look at the marvel of our religion. Deva, God, it takes the last place. In most of the religions, he comes first. We appreciate him last. And this opened my mind. And I said, without having been a Hindu who has been trained being a Hindu, not having had any upbringing as a Hindu, this sufficed me as a human. And then it occurred to me, to be Hindu is to be generally human, nothing more. And that has stayed with me and really propelled me. The next concept that I liked is to be read or understood in adjunct with this is the Panchamahabhuta. The Panchamahabhuta are the four manifest tactile elements. I wouldn't call them elements, I call them the spirits, air, water, soil, and fire. These are the four tangible ones. And then the magic of our ancestors was the fifth one that they invented, the Akash. Akash is not manifest, it's not touchable, we cannot sense it. But look at the genius of it. The four elements, they call it elements, I call them the four spirits, but even then they are subtle. They seem to be gross, but they are subtle, but they're fairly gross that we can touch and feel. The four are found only on Earth. They are not found in all the planets. So when you stop your worship with just the four bhutas, the four elements, you are limiting your idea of the universe to just the planet. The Indian genius thought of the four, the Akash. Akash is the big operating system, the canvas against which the whole universe hangs. When I saw these two truths, it sufficed me as to be the prescriptions are required to live my life out. I suddenly began to find my center. And finally, thanks to your patience, I come to what might be the good work. Along the way, as I was doing this introspection and self-discoveries with these prescriptions, I also found a good work to do. I'll come to it a little later. A good work is anything that gives a little flip to the giant flywheel called the Indian civilization. That's how I see it. If you could expend your energy and give it a little push, you're doing good work. And what might be the good work? Let's take from the list of two lists of 5 each. You can, the bhutas, in the sense of the integrated forest, you could do something about the sustenance and the continuance of that, like rainwater harvesting or replantation or or conserving the forest or starting your own forest. That's obvious. Most people do that. The environmental awareness has taken off. That can happen. What can you do to the Pitru? You can make sure that the knowledge of the wisdom of their generations gets passed on to the other generation. You could do that. So I see that you can find good work that the flywheel would smile at you, the giant civilization. You will feel centered. You will feel centered, and you will feel that there's a purpose to your life. At least there was a purpose at least there's such a purpose in me now. I also want to tell you, the flywheel doesn't care whether you do the good work and give it a push. Whether you push it or not, it'll keep spinning. It'll keep moving, faster or slower. It doesn't matter to it. It has spun without you. It will spin without you. And that doesn't matter. The benefit is to you. It would matter to you if you think that your work is good enough, that it adds a little momentum to the flywheel. Now, with this prescription, I thought one could find a complete life and fulfillment. And for myself, the work I found myself, I'm not a knowledgeable person to transfer the wisdom of the past to others. I'm not equipped enough. But I said, I'll go and look for a piece of abandoned part of India, and I'll turn it green. And I'll raise it, and I'll nurse it, and I'll leave it behind so that it also eternally transfers as an added wealth to this land in which I was born. So I found a piece of land not far from here, about 60 kilometers south of Pondicherry. It was a 20-acre piece of barren land on a slope. All the topsoil had gone. There was no water. There was little water, not easily accessible, and it was not good enough to even wash your hands. There were no trees, and no food had ever grown there, and nobody wanted to buy, and it became a trespassing land. It was full of rocks. I said, I'll take this, and I'll turn it green with the little knowledge I had. So I've been at it for the last 15 years, and there is some evidence that it's happening. And I did it all with extensive rainwater harvesting and afforestation. And right now, if I were to drop dead tomorrow, and if the work that I have done with my rainwater harvesting is not vandalized and covered up by people, that place would harvest 4 million liters of water per year, every year, forever into the future, and charge it into Mother India. I also made a beginning with a small habitat in 5.5 acres, where I have planted only trees that are of no use to man. They are, to a small extent, chose them for their colorfulness and I chose them for the fragrance, but there's no commercial use for him so that it doesn't tempt him to come and cut it. But they would be welcoming of small animals and birds, that they would come and nest. They will find a safe place to root. In an absolutely barren land today, I find more and more birds coming. Not too many. It has a long way to become a fully integrated habitat that qualifies as the third in the list of Panchamahajanya, the Bhutha. It doesn't get there, but I think it's on its way. I'm 80. I'm still at work. It consumes me. It is because I put out the good work of other people first, and then I just wanted to know what might be the good work, and then what would be good for the civilization. And I think I found enough work for myself. I'm not taking any more. I stopped publishing good news stories, and others have taken it up. And I sometimes be very careful, don't consume too much of good stories unless you end up being inspired. So that's my life, and that's my work. Now, my attitude from having started out as a prospective brown Englishman to a thoroughbred, unfortunately unequipped Indian, but a passionate Indian, has a small tailpiece. Now, Nehruji set India to become a socialist Western society, and my father said, don't bother with Sanskrit, it won't feed you. He meant well, poor man, because getting a job was a problem. So I was set in one direction, and Nehruji set India in another direction. It's clear to me, both of us were in two divergent directions, and I don't think the giant flywheel was very amused by either choices, whether the choice my father made for me or the choice Nehruji made for India. No blame to him. He meant well, but we are headed in that direction with an overemphasis on Vikas and less emphasis on the civilizational values that this country must imbibe. And the sooner we correct our path, I'll come back to it. Look at us. Just like my father told me to fence myself surrounded by English books, we have condemned this society to surround itself by a certain book that was given to us in 1950. And we think the entire wisdom, the jurisprudence, and the judgment, and the concern that the society requires will emanate from that book is fencing us in. And we are blocked. I don't know how we are going to come out of it. Until we come back and we recognize the giant windmill, the giant flywheel that I talked about, and we learn to appreciate the timeless, eternal spin it has done. And unless we appreciate the big mass in its rim, that is nothing but the inheritance that our ancestors left. If we do not value that, no value that we search for beyond this beautiful land of ours will ever satisfy us. I'm an individual person. I have the control to correct myself, and I think I have made a turn, but fully unequipped, unarmed, and ill-trained, but nevertheless a blind person, fully believing in that eternal spin of the flywheel. The more people put their hand to it, it's the better. But do you know how we have survived? If I may seem, I don't want to be insulting to you. The spinning of the flywheel has never depended on the kind of people that are gathered at this hall. It has been carried by the people beyond this room who have served us just now, and beyond the people in the fields, beyond the people in the villages who will never miss a festival, they'll never miss a fast, they'll never miss. I've seen people take a fistful of hand, putting it to the head before they eat it. I've seen them worship the tools before they come and begin their day's work. They worship the land before they dig a hole. They go on pilgrimages. They'll never miss the handed-down wisdom of those people. They are the people who are spinning the giant flywheel called India. If we put ourselves, if we are too busy becoming un-Indian, becoming somebody else that we naturally are not, we are supposed to live under the big shadow of the giant flywheel. I'm an 80-year-old man, and I'm supposed to bless my younger cousin, India 45. India is at 75. India is 5 years younger than me. Almost all of you are younger than me. So I suppose you wouldn't mind my little message. Try and do your best to correct the ring fence that you have put ourselves in. We have surrounded ourselves by notions that don't belong with us, doesn't sit well with our culture and our inheritance. I don't know how it will be done. I doubt if it will be done in my lifetime. It doesn't matter. Let it be done in 20 years, 30 years. We go to correct the course we are heading. This is not the way we are going to find our completion in this world. So with that message, thank you for listening. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to talk to you.